Have you ever wondered how thin the line is between a dedicated employee and the executioner of a career? For my boss, it was an arrogantly denied raise after 5 years of loyalty and a cold termination. They think taking your badge strips your power. Forgetting one truth: whoever builds the foundation knows exactly where the fatal cracks hide. I did not scream when escorted out. The deadliest venom is distilled from absolute silence. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. I want to speak to you honestly today because YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep operating here. This means we are forced to pause all new video uploads on this platform for the foreseeable future and transition our operations entirely to Patreon. If you enjoy today's story, please support us by joining our Patreon community, where you will find even better, longer, and incredibly detailed exclusive true stories featuring multiple emotional voice actors that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can join us right now by scanning the Patreon QR code on your screen or by clicking the link in the video description or pinned comment. Now, let us begin today's story with our protagonist, Kendall Bryant. I was 34 years old when I learned exactly what my loyalty was worth. It happened at Ethelgard Logistics Solutions, a rapidly expanding freight corporation based right here in Chicago. It was exactly 8 o'clock on a Friday morning. There was no calendar invite. There was no polite heads up. There was just a sterile ping from the executive assistant telling me to report to the corner office immediately. Valerie Sterling sat behind her massive mahogany desk, her posture rigid and calculating. She did not say good morning. She did not offer me a seat. She did not even pretend to observe the basic social contracts of the workplace. Instead, she slid a single sheet of paper across the polished wood surface. It was an IT log, a printed web browsing history report highlighting a specific timestamp from the previous evening. It clearly showed that I had submitted a job application to our biggest competitor. "We are terminating your employment effective immediately," Valerie stated. Her voice was entirely flat, devoid of any human warmth or hesitation. She leaned back in her expensive leather chair, steepling her perfectly manicured fingers. Then came the familiar, condescending tone I had endured for half a decade. She took immense pleasure in reciting my supposed offenses. She deliberately reminded me of the 5 separate times I had requested a salary increase over the past 5 years. She framed every single one of those requests as a delusional demand from an ungrateful subordinate who completely failed to understand her place in the corporate food chain. "You always wanted more than you were worth," Valerie sneered. Her eyes locked onto mine with a cold superiority. "Good luck demanding privileges over there." She waited. She expected the standard script to play out. She wanted me to panic. She wanted the tears, the apologies, the desperate pleas for a second chance, or even a burst of futile anger. She wanted the validation of seeing me break under her authority. I gave her absolutely nothing. I did not offer a single word of defense. I did not shed a tear. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked at her and allowed a faint, hollow smile to form on my lips. It was a quiet, unreadable expression. For a brief second, the confident mask slipped, and I saw a flicker of genuine discomfort cross Valerie's face. The silence hung heavy and thick in the room, suffocating her sense of absolute victory. My profound lack of fear unnerved her more than any screaming match ever could. I turned and walked out of the office without a backward glance. The ambush had been meticulously coordinated. 2 burly security guards and a grim-faced representative from Human Resources were already waiting in the hallway. They flanked me and escorted me back to my desk like I was a high-risk corporate criminal. As I reached out to touch my company laptop, the screen abruptly flashed and turned pitch black. Remote wipe. I checked my mobile phone. My corporate email access was completely disabled in under 3 minutes. I packed my professional life into a standard brown cardboard box. 5 years of late nights, skipped lunches, and saved crises, all reduced to a handful of pens, a ceramic coffee mug, and a framed photograph. The open floor plan, usually buzzing with energy, was dead silent. Dozens of colleagues, people I had personally mentored and covered for time and time again, suddenly found their screens fascinating. No one made eye contact. No one whispered a word of support. No one said goodbye. The security detail marched me straight through the heavy glass doors and out into the crisp morning air. I walked across the sprawling asphalt of the parking lot entirely alone. When I reached my sedan, I tossed the cardboard box onto the passenger seat and sat heavily behind the wheel. I shut the heavy door, sealing myself inside the quiet, isolated cabin of my car. I waited for the breakdown. I waited for the crushing weight of reality to force the tears to fall. They never came. Instead, a strange, icy wave of relief washed over my body. I gripped the leather steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned bone white. It was breathtakingly brutal. Half a decade of unwavering dedication had just been deleted with a swift keystroke, treated like nothing more than a careless typo in a spreadsheet. But as I sat there in the silence, that coldness crystallized into something incredibly sharp. Valerie thought she had stripped me of my power when she took my badge. She did not realize she had just handed me the match to burn her empire down. To understand how I ended up sitting in my car that morning, holding a cardboard box of my life, you have to rewind the tape. For 5 grueling years, I held the title of Environmental Compliance Lead at Ethelgard. It was a title that sounded incredibly prestigious on a business card, yet it came with a salary that barely hovered above an entry-level data clerk. I was the architect of their safety, yet I was compensated like a temporary intern. Every 12 months, like a twisted corporate holiday, I would sit in Valerie's office for my annual performance review. It was always a masterclass in psychological manipulation. She had a perfectly rehearsed script, delivered with the warm, reassuring tone of a mentor who deeply cared about my future. "You are absolutely irreplaceable, Kendall," she would say, leaning across her desk with a look of manufactured sincerity. "You are the key to this entire operation. We literally could not function without your dedication." But the moment the conversation inevitably shifted to compensation, the warmth would vanish, replaced by a carefully curated look of profound regret. Suddenly, the narrative was about the harsh realities of the logistics industry. It was always a tight budget this fiscal year. It was the ongoing corporate restructuring. It was the unpredictable fuel costs. She would reach across the desk, pat my hand condescendingly, and offer the same hollow promise. "Just hang in there until the next quarterly review. I am fighting for you, Kendall. We just need to weather this current storm." I swallowed that lie for 5 consecutive years. I swallowed it because I was foolish enough to believe that hard work inherently possessed its own undeniable gravity, that eventually, the sheer weight of my contributions would force their hand. And my contributions were not minor. They were the very lifeblood of the company's expansion. What the rest of the executive floor did not know, or deliberately chose to ignore, was that I had single-handedly rewritten Ethelgard's entire emissions reporting system from the ground up. When the state environmental agency rolled out their draconian new inspection protocols 3 years ago, Ethelgard was completely unprepared. They were bleeding money and facing compliance failures that would have crippled their operations. I spent consecutive weekends and countless sleepless nights untangling decades of chaotic data. I built a bulletproof compliance architecture that allowed our fleet to sail through the strictest state audits without a single infraction. That system alone saved Ethelgard millions of dollars in potential state fines and operational shutdowns. I was the invisible shield protecting their bottom line. The illusion of my indispensable value shattered completely on a rainy Tuesday night. It was past 9 o'clock. I was the only soul left on the 4th floor, running a final audit on a third-quarter sustainability report. A shared network folder, usually restricted to the executive team, had been accidentally left unsecured during a server migration. Curiosity got the better of me. I clicked on a file labeled Board Performance Summaries. There it was, documented in stark, undeniable black and white. Valerie had presented my entire emissions system to the board of directors as her own strategic initiative. She took full credit for the optimized reporting, the flawless state audits, and the millions of dollars saved. But the true gut punch was the compensation column. For her brilliant leadership in implementing my system, Valerie was awarded an executive bonus. That single bonus payout was exactly 10 times the amount of the meager salary increase I had practically begged her for just 2 months prior. I sat in the glow of my monitor, the air in the empty office suddenly feeling thick and unbreathable. The betrayal was a physical weight on my chest. I had been playing a game with a rigged deck, pouring my absolute soul into a machine that was designed only to extract my value and transfer the rewards upward. Yet, the final catalyst, the absolute last straw, was not even the stolen money. It was the stolen integrity. A few days after my discovery in the network folder, I was reviewing the logistics manifests for our anchor client, a massive national retail chain that accounted for more than half of our yearly revenue. I found a glaring, catastrophic discrepancy. To force an impossible delivery schedule and secure an early completion incentive, Valerie had quietly authorized our dispatchers to bypass mandatory hazardous material routing protocols. She was deliberately hiding a severe compliance violation, playing a dangerous game of roulette with federal transport laws just to pad the quarterly numbers. If an accident happened, if a state inspector pulled over the wrong truck, the fallout would be apocalyptic. And because my name was on the compliance sign-offs, I would be the one legally crucified. While Valerie feigned ignorance from her mahogany desk, she was not just stealing my credit anymore. She was actively preparing to use me as a human shield for her own reckless greed. That same night, I opened a new browser tab. I did not hesitate. I polished my resume, detailing every complex system I had built, every crisis I had averted, and every dollar I had saved. I found the open listing for a senior position at Meridian Apex, our fiercest competitor. When I moved my cursor over the submit button, my hand trembled for just a fraction of a second. There was a lingering ghost of loyalty, a deeply ingrained fear of betraying the only corporate home I had known for half a decade. But that fleeting guilt was instantly suffocated by an overwhelming, primal desire to break free. I was suffocating inside an invisible cage, surrounded by the rotting carcass of my own undervalued potential. I clicked submit. I did not know it then, but that single click was the first tremor of an earthquake that would eventually bring Valerie Sterling's entire empire crashing down around her. The very next Monday morning, just 72 hours after I was escorted out of my previous life, I walked through the towering glass doors of Meridian Apex. They were the undisputed giants of the East Coast freight market, an apex predator in an industry built on tight margins and relentless momentum. This was my final interview. The air in their headquarters felt fundamentally different. It was not the frantic, corner-cutting chaos of Ethelgard. It was cold, calculated, and terrifyingly precise. I was guided into a sprawling boardroom overlooking the city skyline. 5 executives sat across a massive marble table. I took my seat, smoothing my skirt, fully expecting the standard corporate interrogation. I prepared myself to recite my 5-year vision and invent a palatable greatest weakness. None of that happened. The chief operating officer, a sharp-eyed man with silver hair, did not even open my resume. Instead, he reached into his leather portfolio and slid a thick stack of stapled papers across the smooth marble. It stopped right in front of me. I looked down, and my breath caught in my throat. It was a schematic of a data structure. Specifically, it was a predictive compliance algorithm I had designed 2 years ago. It was a prototype I had pitched to Valerie, which she had killed in development because she deemed it too transparent. I had never published it. I had never deployed it. Yet, here it was, sitting on a table at our biggest competitor. "We are not here to talk about your strengths and weaknesses," Kendall, the chief operating officer, said, leaning forward. His voice was quiet but carried immense weight. "We have been watching Ethelgard's aggressive expansion in the Midwest. Their growth metrics are mathematically improbable, given the current federal ecological mandates. We know they are taking shortcuts." He tapped the document in front of me. "We acquired this theoretical framework through a third-party industry consultant. It is brilliant, but it also tells us exactly how a company could theoretically manipulate state emission sensors if they chose to ignore the built-in safeguards. So, tell us about the shortcuts." The room went dead silent. 5 pairs of eyes locked onto me, waiting to see if I would crack. It was a brutal test of character. If I spilled company secrets, I violated my non-disclosure agreement, proving I was a legal liability. If I played dumb, I proved I was just an oblivious mid-level manager who lacked strategic vision. I did not panic. The icy calm from Friday morning returned, sharper than ever. I pushed the document back toward the center of the table. I cannot speak to the internal operational decisions of my former employer, I began, my voice steady and deliberately measured. However, if we are discussing this purely as a theoretical vulnerability assessment within current supply chain logistics, I can tell you exactly where a system like that would fracture under federal scrutiny. For the next 45 minutes, I did not give them a single piece of proprietary data. Instead, I dismantled the very concept of fraudulent ecological compliance. I walked them through the exact cascading risks of bypassing hazard protocols. I mapped out how falsified emission logs would inevitably create a glaring discrepancy between fuel consumption and cargo weight. I painted a terrifyingly clear picture of a logistical house of cards, using nothing but my own razor-sharp expertise and publicly available regulatory frameworks. I showed them the anatomy of a disaster waiting to happen. When I finished, the silence in the room was no longer heavy with suspicion, but with absolute focused attention. The chief executive officer, a woman who had been completely silent the entire time, finally uncrossed her arms. She looked at me with a gaze so piercing it felt like she was reading my DNA. "We do not need you to confirm anything, Kendall," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet room. "We already know Valerie Sterling signed off on those exact systemic risks. She is building a house on quicksand. The only question that matters today is this. Do you have the courage to spearhead a project to clean up the garbage left behind by opportunists?" I looked her dead in the eye. "I do not just clean up garbage," I replied smoothly. "I build systems that ensure the opportunists never get through the door in the first place." The official offer letter hit my personal inbox at exactly 3 o'clock that same afternoon. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the screen. The numbers were staggering. The base salary was exactly 2.5 times what Valerie had been paying me. But the money was not the most intoxicating part. It was the title. Senior Director of Compliance. It came with absolute, independent decision-making authority. I answered only to the board. I raised my hands to my face, and for the first time since Friday, I realized I was trembling. But it was not the frantic shaking of fear or anxiety. It was the terrifying, electric vibration of a locked door finally swinging wide open. The power was no longer an illusion. It was real. It was firmly in my hands, and I knew exactly where I was going to aim it. My first 30 days at Meridian Apex were defined by a chilling, absolute silence. If anyone expected me to immediately launch a vindictive crusade against my former employer, they were sorely disappointed. I did not update my professional network profiles. I did not reach out to my former colleagues to gloat about my new corner office. I changed my phone number and severed every single connection to my past. Vengeance is not allowed. Chaotic beast. True vengeance is a ghost. It thrives in the shadows, entirely unnoticed until the temperature in the room suddenly drops below freezing. I buried myself in my new role, analyzing Meridian's vast infrastructure. Then, during my 4th week, the tectonic plates of the industry quietly shifted. I was called into a secure, windowless conference room on the executive floor. The chief executive officer and the head of the legal department were waiting. They handed me a thick, confidential dossier bound in a red folder. Meridian Apex was in the final, highly classified stages of acquiring a massive, nationwide retail conglomerate. This acquisition was meant to solidify Meridian's absolute dominance over the domestic market. I opened the dossier and read the name of the target company. My heart performed a slow, heavy beat against my ribs. It was them. The retail giant was none other than Ethelgard's anchor client. They were the very same corporation whose hazardous material routes Valerie had been illegally manipulating. They represented a staggering 60% of Ethelgard's total annual revenue. They were the singular pillar keeping Valerie Sterling's empire from collapsing into dust, and Meridian was about to own them. "Before we finalize this merger," the chief executive officer said, her voice hushed to prevent any leaks, "we need a forensic teardown of their existing supply chain dependencies. We need to know exactly what we are buying. I am putting you in charge of a blind, independent audit team. You have full clearance to dig into every logistical partner they currently use. Find the liabilities. I looked down at the documents, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. The universe has a remarkably twisted sense of humor. I did not have to scheme. I did not have to plot an elaborate, illegal sabotage. All I had to do to destroy Valerie Sterling was my job. If I executed this audit with absolute, uncompromising honesty, the entire web of fabricated reports she was maintaining would be dragged into the blistering sunlight. I assembled a small, elite team of data analysts. For the next 3 weeks, we practically lived in the war room. I knew exactly where the bodies were buried at Ethelgard, but I could not use my insider knowledge directly. The audit had to be completely impenetrable, legally flawless, and entirely based on external data points. So, I built the trap. I designed a series of automated cross-check algorithms, specifically tailored to flag impossible logistical timelines. I fed the system publicly available weigh station data, state toll records, and federal fuel consumption averages, then layered them against the vendor reports Ethelgard was submitting to the retail chain. It was a mathematical snare. I knew exactly which corners Valerie would force my inexperienced replacement to cut. I knew they were still hiding the hazardous material violations. I knew they were still faking the emissions data to secure the early delivery bonuses. My algorithms did not hack their servers. They simply looked at Ethelgard's claimed delivery times and asked one simple question: does the math match reality? It did not. It was not even close. The discrepancies began lighting up my dashboard like a warning beacon. Missing weigh station check-ins, impossible mileage to fuel ratios, delivery windows that could only be achieved if their trucks were literally defying the laws of physics and federal transport regulations. The algorithms methodically pulled the thread, and the entire fraudulent sweater Valerie had knitted completely unraveled. On a quiet Thursday afternoon, I compiled the final audit. It was a massive, devastating document that detailed systematic, multi-million-dollar compliance fraud committed by their primary logistics vendor. It outlined severe legal liabilities that would immediately transfer to Meridian Apex if the merger proceeded without cutting ties with Ethelgard. I did not feel a rush of adrenaline. I did not smile. I printed the document, placed it inside a crisp white envelope, and walked down the silent, carpeted hallway to the merger committee. "The audit is complete," I said, handing the envelope to the legal director. I walked back to my office, poured myself a glass of water, and looked out at the city below. The storm had not broken yet. The sky was still perfectly clear, but the mechanism was locked. The gears were turning. I had set an irreversible, perfectly legal trap, and now all I had to do was wait for the trap to snap shut. The shockwave hit Ethelgard Logistics on a Tuesday morning. It was not a subtle shift in the market. It was a corporate execution. Our anchor client, the retail behemoth that kept Valerie's entire operation afloat, dispatched a formal notice of immediate, unilateral contract termination. The document cited severe, unrectifiable breaches of federal ecological compliance and hazardous material transport protocols. Attached to the termination was a litigation hold, a brutal legal mechanism threatening massive lawsuits for fraudulent vendor reporting. Through my industry contacts, I knew exactly what the fallout looked like on the 4th floor of Ethelgard. It was absolute pandemonium. The sudden loss of 60% of their annual revenue was not just a bad quarter, it was an extinction-level event. Valerie Sterling, the woman who always possessed a condescending script for every situation, was completely cornered. Panic set in. She began tearing through her office, demanding emergency board meetings, and frantically dialing the retail executives, practically begging for a grace period, a probationary window, or just a single opportunity to explain the anomalies and rectify the situation. The retail conglomerate, acting on the strict advisory of Meridian Apex's legal team, let her sweat for exactly 48 hours. Finally, they agreed to a single, emergency video conference. It was framed as a final opportunity to hear her explanation before the termination became legally irreversible. However, The retail executive stipulated one non-negotiable condition. The head of the merger audit committee from their incoming parent company had to be present to verify the technical data. Valerie eagerly agreed. She assumed she would be facing another faceless corporate auditor, someone she could easily dazzle with her signature blend of industry jargon and manufactured confidence. The video conference was scheduled for 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I sat in my private office, dressed in a sharply tailored charcoal gray suit. The lighting in my office was stark, casting long shadows across my polished desk. I adjusted my posture, feeling an unnatural, profound stillness settle into my bones. My eyes were as calm and unreadable as a deep, frozen lake. The meeting commenced, the large monitor on my wall illuminated, splitting into multiple grids. In the top left corner sat the retail executives, their expressions stern and unforgiving. In the center frame sat Valerie Sterling. She had clearly prepared for a performance. She wore her most authoritative navy blazer. Her hair was perfectly styled. She had a stack of laminated folders arranged neatly in front of her. She leaned toward the camera, her face arranged into a mask of polite, diplomatic concern, her lips parting to deliver her perfectly rehearsed opening statement of apologies and false promises. Then, my video feed clicked on. Valerie's eyes darted to my square on the screen. The transformation was instantaneous and magnificent. The smooth, practiced smile on her face froze, then completely shattered. All the color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking sickly and hollow. Her mouth hung slightly open, but no words came out. The air seemed to physically leave her lungs. For a stretched, agonizing moment, she simply stared at the screen, her mind violently attempting to process the impossible reality. Staring back at her, the subordinate she had tossed out like garbage was sitting in the judge's chair. I did not offer a polite greeting. I did not smile. I did not acknowledge our history. "Let us begin," I stated. I deliberately modulated my voice, stripping it of all warmth, using the exact same flat, surgical tone she had used on me the morning she fired me. Valerie stammered, her voice trembling. Miss Bryant, I did not realize you were heading this committee. There has to be a misunderstanding here. If we could just review the baseline metrics." I cut her off immediately. I did not raise my voice. I simply let the weight of the data crush her. "There is no misunderstanding, Valerie. We are not here to negotiate. We are here to review the facts." I opened my black leather portfolio. Between the 1st of April and the 30th of September, Ethelgard authorized the rerouting of 74 distinct hazardous material shipments through unauthorized residential corridors to artificially decrease delivery windows. You falsified the corresponding way station logs to hide the fuel discrepancies. "That was a dispatch error," Valerie gasped, her hands shaking as she grabbed a piece of paper. "We had a rogue manager in the regional office. I have already fired him." "Do not lie," I commanded. The coldness in my voice echoed through the speakers. "I have the direct authorization signatures. Furthermore, following my departure, you slashed the compliance oversight budget by 40%, forcing your new lead to bypass the automated emission safeguards. You submitted fraudulent data to a federal partner to secure a $3 million performance bonus." She tried to speak again, a desperate, frantic noise escaping her throat, but I kept reading. I methodically laid out every single technical violation, every cut corner, every manufactured lie. I systematically dismantled her entire defense with undeniable, concrete numbers. I pinned her to the wall with the very algorithms she had once dismissed. The retail executives watched in grim silence as the CEO of Ethelgard Logistics was mathematically and professionally vivisected live on camera. Tears of sheer humiliation finally welled up in Valerie's eyes. The arrogant, untouchable executive was gone, replaced by a terrified fraud watching her empire burn to ash. "Kendall, please," she whispered, her voice breaking completely, abandoning all professional decorum. "We can fix this. I can fix this. Just give us a 90-day probationary extension. Do not do this to the company." I looked at her desperate, pleading face through the high-definition monitor. I remembered the cold leather of my steering wheel. I remembered the 5 years of manipulation. I remembered the silence of the parking lot. I leaned slightly closer to the camera, my expression entirely hollow. "We do not tolerate systemic risks," I said quietly. I reached out and clicked the button to end the call. The screen instantly went black. The consequences were immediate and absolutely brutal. With 60% of their annual revenue instantly wiped off the ledger, the board of directors at Ethelgard did not hesitate for a single second. Valerie Sterling was unceremoniously ousted before the sun went down that very same Tuesday. Her career did not just end, it completely collapsed under the crushing weight of public, mathematically documented fraud. She was utterly disgraced, stripped of her executive titles, and left facing a towering mountain of corporate litigation. 4 days later, I was sitting at my polished desk when my personal cell phone illuminated. The caller identification displayed Valerie's private number. I sat in the quiet of my office and looked at the glowing screen. I imagined her on the other end. She was likely frantic, wanting to scream, to threaten, or perhaps even to offer a pathetic apology. I did not pick it up. I did not smile with malicious triumph. I simply watched the screen vibrate for a few moments, calmly pressed the decline button, and permanently blocked the contact. Engaging in a bitter argument with a defeated opponent is a profound waste of newly acquired power. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair and listened to my assistant pull the heavy glass door of my office shut. It was a solid, comforting sound. It was the sound of impenetrable safety. This beautiful space, this immense authority, belonged entirely to me. I thought back to that Friday morning. I remembered the deeply condescending smirk on Valerie's face as she ordered the security guards to strip away my employee badge. She honestly believed she was cleverly eliminating a minor financial nuisance. She never realized the profound irony of her own arrogance. She had personally thrown away the one and only shield capable of protecting her fragile, crumbling empire, all just to save a few $1,000s on a well-deserved salary increase. I stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the sprawling Chicago skyline. I watched the tiny lines of freight trucks navigating the massive highways far below, moving smoothly under the systems I now controlled. I realized a fundamental truth about corporate survival. The greatest revenge is not screaming. It is not actively plotting to ruin someone. The greatest revenge is simply stepping aside and letting their own blinding incompetence kill them, while you stand high above, being paid very handsomely to document the death. Thank you so much, from the bottom of my heart, for listening to my story today. I would love to know, where in the world are you tuning in from right now? Please let me know in the comments below. As a quick and important reminder, because YouTube has unfortunately demonetized our channel, we will absolutely not be uploading any new videos here for the foreseeable future. We are transitioning our work completely over to Patreon. If you found today's story satisfying, please help us keep going by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon channel. There, you can listen to our very best, exclusive true stories that we absolutely cannot make public on YouTube. You can easily join us by scanning the QR code on your screen right now, or by clicking the Patreon link in the video description or the pinned comment. Thank you again for your incredible support, and I cannot wait to share the next chapter with you over there.